Hello my friends and welcome to the channel. With the Escape From Tarkov 1.0 release within sight, I must admit that I've been feeling a lot more nostalgic for Tarkov than I really expected to. The closer we get to full release, I can't help but remember all the time that I've spent immersed in this game, both as a player and as a content creator. There's been good times, bad times, and everything in between, and the journey from closed alpha to full release has been a wild ride. In this video, I just wanted to sit down and take a look at some of the most iconic weapons in Tarkov, guns and builds for those guns that are some of the first things that come to my mind when I think about Tarkov. And you know, I can't think of any better place to start when talking about quintessential Tarkov weapons than the AK-74. This rifle and its many variants are ubiquitous in the world of Tarkov. If you have played Tarkov, you have used the AK-74, and I'm willing to bet you've used it quite a bit. It was one of the first weapons to exist in the game. It's one of the first assault rifles you can unlock to buy. It is one of, if not the most common weapon to find on scavs and in weapon crates. While it might not be flashy or a status symbol like some of the other weapons in Tarkov, the AK-74 has been our trusty companion for so many years that I think it more than deserves to be classified as one of the most iconic weapons in Tarkov, simply because it is unavoidable. There's so many builds for this weapon that it's honestly hard to pick a single AK-74 build that really stands out as the most iconic. But if I had to make a choice, I feel like the original AK-74N meta build from way back in like 2018-2019 would have to be my pick. This setup used the CMDR handguard, the Zhukov stock, a shift foregrip, 60 round mag, and the PBS4 suppressor. And way back when I started making Tarkov weapon videos, this was one of the first true meta builds in the game. Over time, the best build for this gun has changed quite a lot, but to me, this is the one that always comes to mind when I think about the AK-74. Next up, we can't talk about iconic Tarkov weapons without mentioning the M4A1. Much like the AK-74, the M4 has been in Tarkov since before I can even remember, and it's pretty much always been one of the best weapons in the game. I can still remember my very first Tarkov wipe, and how good it felt to finally run my first ever raid with a kitted out M4. Back then, a fully loaded M4 looked a lot different than it does now, but the feeling was the same. A kitted M4 is a symbol that you've made it in Tarkov, that you're past the early game and you're raiding for real now. To me, the M4A1 is an iconic weapon in Tarkov for a lot of reasons, but first and foremost for me is the fact that it might just be the one single weapon that uses the Tarkov gunsmithing tools to their fullest potential, and few other weapons even come close to the M4 in that regard. I haven't run the numbers myself, but I feel pretty confident in saying that no other weapon in Tarkov has more individual parts and attachments than the M4. It's also one of the few weapons that you can strip all the way down to nothing but a receiver and rebuild with completely new pieces in every single slot to create something completely different than what you started with. The M4 is almost infinitely customizable, and unlike some other weapons in Tarkov, you can make weird off-meta M4 builds that are not only unique, but also totally functional. Short barrel, long barrel, whatever you want. The M4 can be a PDW or a DMR or anything in between. And if you know how to build it correctly, it'll be an awesome build. Throughout the years, we've had many different M4 builds come and go, and it's almost always been relevant in the PvP meta. To me though, the iconic Tarkov M4 build is the meta build from around the 2019 to 2020 mark. This setup uses the SAI quad rail handguard, a shift grip, advanced buffer tube with the MOE stock and a butt pad, and the Grawl S pistol grip, plus the 60 round drum mag. When I first started making Tarkov videos, this build was basically the top dog in the game. This was a 300,000 ruble build back when 300,000 rubles was actually a lot of money. And once you got to the point where you were running this gun consistently, you knew you were in the end game. Of course, there's a ton of other M4 builds that I have loved over the years, but to me, this is the iconic Tarkov M4, and it still looks as sick today as it did 5 years ago when it was the new hot commodity. While we're talking about the M4, we might as well talk about its younger cousin, the HK416, a weapon that once struck fear in the hearts of Tarkov Timmies everywhere, but has sadly fallen from grace and honestly never really regained the dominant position it once had. The 416 is extremely similar to the M4 in a lot of ways, but in Tarkov at least, it simply never had the same versatility as the M4. While there's technically a ton of different builds you could make with the 416, there was only ever really one that was amazing. First, you slap the longest barrel you can find onto it, then you screw on the highest recoil reduction suppressor, handguard, and stock. Then you head into a raid, point it at the first PMC you find, hold down the trigger, and absolutely melt them. Or at least you did, back when it was still good. If you missed out on the HK416 in its glory days, I feel bad for you, because this gun was a dream to use with its meta build back when it was first added to the game. You had a crazy fire rate, low recoil, one of the best armor pen ammos in the game at the time, and a muzzle velocity so high that you could honestly snipe with it if you really wanted to. I'll never understand why BSG hasn't really kept up with adding attachments for the 416, because they certainly do exist in real life. We don't even have a full tan setup for this rifle, which is a damn shame. But once upon a time, the HK416 was among the most feared Tarkov weapons of all time, and I think that alone makes it iconic. And since we have our heads stuck in the past right now, we might as well take a look at the other weapon that absolutely dominated Tarkov alongside the HK416 back in the day, the SA-58. A modernized reproduction of the FN-FAL, and one of my absolute all-time favorite weapons in Tarkov. The SA-58 was, I do believe, the first full-auto 7.62x51 weapon ever added to Escape from Tarkov. And because of that, it was kind of destined to become one of the best weapons in the game at the time. But to me, it's not just iconic because it was good, though that helps. But to me, this rifle is iconic because of the vibes. It just oozes swagger. It looks awesome with upgraded attachments on it. The firing sound is amazing, both loud and suppressed. The heavy metallic clack of the reloads and the sharp clink of the charging handle are all just amazing and top tier among the sound effects in Tarkov. It also has some great animations all around, and one of the most recognizable unsuppressed firing sounds in the entire game of Tarkov. The sound of a loud full-auto SA-58 blasting across the map is unmistakable, and once upon a time that sound was like a dinner bell calling PMCs across the map to try and steal this thing from your cold dead hands. Like the HK though, the SA-58 has only ever really had one optimal build, using the CASV FAL handguard, the AG FAL pistol grip, and then whatever stock has the highest recoil reduction at the time. Personally, for my money, I would also say that the most iconic SA-58 build uses the Lantac blast mitigation device and runs this thing loud, just to hear that beautiful roar of this thing blasting away. I love this gun, and even when it fell out of the meta, I could never stop using it. It's just too awesome to put down. After the SA-58, I think now is a good time to talk about the rifle that kind of took over its spot after it was nerfed, the 7.62 MDR. I can remember a time when this rifle was looked at as a crappy alternative to the SA-58. It only has a 20 round mag? Ew, get that thing out of here. But after the SA-58 was nerfed, the 7.62 MDR slowly started to creep into relevance until it eventually became part of the stereotypical Labs main PvP loadout. You would see it everywhere, to the point where you could just look at the front page of the Tarkov Twitch section and all of the thumbnails would just be MDR rifles with a voodoo scope on Labs. The MDR ended up being good at most things the SA-58 was good at, but it also had some advantages the SA-58 never did. It was smaller, so it's easier to use in tight spaces and around cover. It was lighter, so it was easier to pack into your loadout without going overweight. And both of these things also meant it was far easier to shoot at long range because it didn't eat up your stamina while you were aiming. Personally, I think the SA-58 still has a higher cool factor, but you can't deny that the MDR made just as much of an impact on the PvP landscape of Tarkov, and it's certainly part of the PvP Chad starter pack. Next up, let's take a break from rifles for a minute and take a look at what I would argue is the undisputed king of the submachine guns in Escape from Tarkov, the MP7A2. The MP7 has basically been meta since the exact moment it was added to the game. This thing has a high fire rate, low recoil, low weight, small size, great armor pen and velocity for an SMG, and honestly, it's always had a cheap price compared to other top tier builds. It was kind of destined to be good, and personally, I don't think it has ever once dropped out of the running as one of the best weapons in Tarkov. Literally from the day it was added to the game until right now while I'm making this video, the MP7 has been one of the most sought after pieces of gear in Tarkov. And I would even bet that if we could run the numbers, it might actually be one of the most used weapons in Tarkov history. The MP7 is super easy to build, extremely effective against basically any type of enemy in the game, and somehow has always been budget friendly as well. You can see this thing in the hands of full send PvP chads and sneaky little budget rats. It's one of the only SMGs that has consistently been in the top of the PvP meta, and really the only thing that has ever been nerfed about the MP7 is access to its best ammo. There's not much to say about the MP7 that has not already been said. This gun is an iconic Tarkov weapon without a doubt, and I do not see a future where it doesn't continue to be one of the most used weapons in the game. Alright, so after the MP7, let's talk about one of my most hated weapons in Tarkov history, but one that is hard to deny iconic status, the MK47 Mutant. This rifle was added to the game and almost instantly became a tier 0 weapon when paired with the 7.62x39 BP ammo. For the first wipe or two after the Mutant was added, it was unescapable. This rifle with high penetration 7.62 ammo was the king of Tarkov PvP, giving players a frighteningly consistent 2-shot thorax kill with a weapon that had low recoil and a good fire rate. If I remember correctly, it was also added to the game right around the time that 7.62 BP was buffed to do more damage and have more armor pen. And this gun with a big drum mag kind of became the de facto king of labs. I remember getting so tired of seeing 7.62 BP on the death screen that just seeing those words put together started to give me an angry twitch. Everywhere you went, you just heard the telltale firing sounds of the Mutant. And more often than not, that was the last thing you heard in that raid. And you can't deny that this is a pretty cool gun as well. It essentially just looks like an M4 that shoots AK rounds. It gave 7.62x39 access to a long barrel for the first time, and the sounds, animations, and feel of the gun are all top notch. While I will never forget the frustration I felt at the time between this and the RD704 making all other weapons obsolete in PvP, I cannot deny that the Mutant is one of the most iconic weapons in Tarkov history. And now going from a weapon that I hated to one that I've always loved with all my heart, the RSASS. You could maybe replace this one with the SR25 or the G28, but to me, the RSASS will always have a special place in Tarkov as one of the first true status symbols in the game. One of the first guns that you could see on a player and just know, oh damn, that guy is rich, he's running an RSASS. This weapon was the first real DMR added to Tarkov, and throughout the entire history of the game, it's always been a relatively rare, expensive, boutique kind of build. It may have never been the best weapon in the game, but if you were running the RSASS, it meant that you had made it, because you had to be rich and high level to run this weapon at all. The RSASS is just such a cool looking gun. Combine that with great animations, sound effects, and the natural cool factor of running a semi-auto sniper, and you have yourself a recipe for success. For most of Tarkov's history, this rifle has also been an iconic roadblock in quest progression, since it's needed for a gunsmith quest that used to be pretty early in the quest chain. So finding yourself an RSASS was honestly an important part of your Tarkov wipe as a whole. And when you picked it up in a raid, suddenly you were sweating because you needed to extract with this thing to complete your quest. Over the years, it was kind of pushed out of the meta by the SR25 and the G28, which are both arguably better and easier to get. The RSASS will always hold a special place as the first and fanciest of the DMR builds in Tarkov, however. Next up, while we're talking about sniper rifles in Tarkov, I think it's safe to say that the most iconic bolt-action rifle in Tarkov history is the suppressed DVL-10. This little green monster could be called iconic just based on looks alone. It has such a distinctive color and silhouette that it's impossible to mistake it for any other weapon in the game. Because it's the only integrally suppressed bolt action in the game, at least I think it is, there might be a new one now, It also became one of the most popular rifles for people to run while doing the sniper quests, because it let you be far more stealthy while farming those bolt action kills. It's also one of those rifles that basically comes as a complete package. You don't need to swap out handguards and stocks or really change anything. You just buy yourself a DVL with the suppressed barrel, slap a scope on it, and you're good. It's simple, effective, and visually sets itself apart from all the other bolt actions in the game. I think it's easy to call this one iconic, and I bet it's among the most used snipers in Tarkov. And you know, I could probably sit here and keep listing iconic Tarkov weapons for another hour, but this script is already getting long, so I'm just gonna rapid fire out a couple of honorable mentions and weapons that are undeniably iconic, but I don't have enough thoughts on them to write a whole paragraph. First up, we have the 5.7 pistol. This thing has basically always been the best pistol in Tarkov, and is iconic as a piece of the ultimate budget rat loadout that people used for years while running stashes and looting the interchange underground. Next, we have the Keter B, one of the ultimate leg meta champions, and a weapon that I honestly do not think I have ever seen in another video game besides Tarkov. That fact alone makes it pretty iconic, but also it's just a classic of early wipe Tarkov and one that I always enjoy using. Then of course we have the Mosin, not as popular in modern Tarkov, but this thing was once so prevalent that it actually made BSG increase the thorax HP from 80 to 85, so people would stop complaining about getting one-shot killed by the Mosin. That fact alone makes it maybe one of the most iconic Tarkov weapons in all of this game's history. And how could I forget the KS-23? This thing was a menace when it was first introduced, and it had to be shadow banned off the flea market for a long time because it was just too cheap and too effective to be handed out to everybody in mass quantities. This gun has one of, if not the highest base damage of any gun in the game, and it can fire flashbang shells, which have been used to farm countless Twitch clips over the years that it's been in the game. What about the Ash 12? This is the signature weapon of Gluhar, and one of the most awkward yet satisfying weapons to use in Tarkov. Who doesn't love the idea of a compact, bullpup, subsonic 50 caliber assault rifle? And last but not least, we have the humble Makarov pistol. Unironically, the least effective weapon in all of Tarkov, but where would we be without it? If you ask me, the worst weapon in Tarkov is just as iconic as the best weapon in Tarkov. And that pretty much covers it for this one. If you've followed my channel, you might know that I burnt out on Tarkov really hard over this last year. But the closer we get to full release, the more I can't help but be excited to see what this next chapter of the Tarkov journey brings. I hope you enjoyed this video, because I had fun going down memory lane and remembering all of the different builds and shifts in the meta that have come throughout the years. Let me know what you think of my choices here, and put your picks for the most iconic Tarkov weapons and builds down in the comments. There's like 200 weapons in this game, so I'm sure I'm missing something. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got a link to my Twitch stream in the description if you want to come check out some Tarkov gameplay and say hi when full release happens. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City, everyone.